Hello and welcome to the Halloween edition of the Nocturne Society broadcast. This is Chad, the founder of the Nocturne Society, and tonight, because Halloween's coming up, we're going to do a little bit of Halloween history, and then I'll share some of my paranormal experiences with you, just a little bit of them that happened when I was growing up in rural Iowa. Before we get started, I wanted to do a few reminders. The Southern Wisconsin Paranormal Research Group is having a conference on October 30th. I have that posted on my site up at the top there. Just to remind you, went to it last year. It was pretty fun. Had a lot of speakers. Some were authors, others were website people, as myself, such as Weird Wisconsin, whose link is on there. Authors of Beast of Bray Road, and Chad Lewis from The Unexplained was there. They had some vendors selling books and mystical whatnots. So it was a pretty good time. I believe the fee to get in is $12. If you want to go to their site, you can either click the link, or their website is www.paranormalresearchgroup.homestead.com, and they've got the information there on their front page. Also, on a side note, I wanted to a little bit of an update. I wrote an article, or relayed an article a few months, it was about a month ago, about a human howl. It's still posted on the front page there, and it's got an audio file of what people were supposedly hearing out in the woods. And I had made a comment that it sounded rather ridiculous, and the voice sounds like a human trying to howl like a wolf. Now, I took a trip into July, no, it was the beginning of September, out to Los Angeles. I used to live out there for about 10 years, and went up to if you're familiar at all with Los Angeles, there's a Mount Pinos. That's a reserve, national forest that is up in the mountains, about 5,000 feet. And while I lived in LA, I had moved up there for a couple of years, and we were visiting friends. So we were up there, and it's rather wild. There's bears and cougar, and you have to be a little bit careful and cautious out there, and rattlesnakes as well. But so we were out in a friend's cabin with them, and this was up in the woods, and on the edge of nature. And at about 3 a.m, I woke up, and I heard a sound, and it was. I found it so strange because I grew up with hearing coyotes. I grew up on a farm in Iowa, so I know what they sound like. And what I heard at 3 a.m. up there in the mountains was almost exactly like that audio file. And it happened about 3 or 4 times, and it made the hair stand up on the back of your neck. But again, it sounded exactly like a human trying to howl like a wolf. And I was really surprised that I heard it. And it could have very well still been a human trying to howl like a wolf. I mean, it was the weekend, and perhaps someone was having a bit too much of a good time out there. It's not like we were out isolated. There were other houses around. So, could have been. I don't know. But kind of made me eat my words there for a little bit, thinking that wasn't something legitimate. Okay, on with the program. I did a little research on Halloween history just as a blurb with Halloween coming up. I thought it'd be a nice little thing to mention. where Halloween came from. But when I started delving into the history of Halloween, I kind of bit off more than I could chew. It turns out it's got quite a history and is quite a mishmash of different things. In fact, I was surprised to find it was one of the oldest holidays that we celebrate. It predates Christ and predates written word. So the guesstimates of how old Halloween is about, nobody knows for sure, because like I said, nobody wrote down any history. But the guesstimates is at about 4000 BC, and they didn't call it Halloween then. Of course, it was a Celtic holiday called Samhain. What we have today is a mix of that and Christian influence, and then of course the Americanized version of it that we all have now. The day by the Celts was a day that they used to honor the harvest and prepare for the coming winter, because they could tell, they had no science that we know of, but they could tell, when the earth is changing, of course, just like anything. And to them, time was a cylindrical thing. It wasn't linear like we think of it as continually going down a straight line. It wrapped around and around, and at that point in Samhain, they believed things reset or started over. So the time has gone all the way around and has started again. So that was a magical time for them, and so they celebrated it with bonfires, and they also believed it was a time when they could come in contact with their passed on loved ones. And I guess that's what kind of led Halloween down the dark path that it is of ghosts and whatnot, because they believe they could talk to their spirit ancestors. But it wasn't to them a ghostly thing. They weren't. It was a happy time. It was a good time. It wasn't like they were scared, or they didn't know anything. They didn't believe in demons. They didn't believe in heaven or hell or evil. So, perhaps they believed in evil in man, but they didn't believe in the spirits of their ancestors being evil. They did, however, believe in fairies and elves, and they thought that the humans living where they did had pushed the elves out into the world of their dead, which it wasn't really the land of the dead, because when Americans especially think of the land of the dead, we think of hell, and that's not the way they saw it. It wasn't like that. It wasn't a bad place to be. It wasn't heaven. It was just like the other side of the veil, if you want to call it that. But the pixies and fairies they felt like they were mischievous and kind of resented man for pushing them out of their what they believed was their home. So it wasn't that these things were evil. It was just that they're, if you came across them, it was best to leave them alone because they were trouble causing. The Romans also had, before Christianity took over in Rome, they also had a harvest celebration that was on November 1st. And actually Samhain, to go back, the harvest festival they had was called the Festival of Pomona, and it was on November 1st. Samhain, that we celebrate today, Halloween, is the eve of Samhain. So the Celts as well, they celebrated the night of, the eve of, and then the day was also a day of celebration. Christianity then took over Rome, and Rome in their Roman ways started conquering and spreading Christianity with them. When they got to the Celts were like, well, you believe in this is great. That's good for you. We believe in this other thing. So let's live in peace. Well, of course we know Christianity doesn't work that way. You convert or die. So that's where a lot of the changes came. And when they found that they couldn't push their beliefs onto people, they, after thousands and thousands of years, they kind of want to stay with their Celtic beliefs. So Christianity moved some of their holidays to overlap the holidays of the Celts, so that, over time, they'd forget about their silly, meager holidays, and it would just blend into the dominant religion in the area. They did this with several holidays. December 25th, before it was Christmas, and the birth of Christ, it was the pagan birth of the god Mithra. Now, ironically, it became the birth of Christ. And there was a Celtic... now, I'm not sure about this holiday. I haven't done a lot of research on this holiday, but it's Oimelc. Omelc? Tough word. That... Now, I don't know what happened on this holiday or what this celebrates, but it was changed to Easter. So Easter falls on that day. And Samhain, of course, was then called by the Christians Hallows Eve. And to get people away from believing their beliefs, they told the Celts that, like, oh, you poor uneducated fools, don't you know that those elves and fairies that you see aren't elves and fairies. They aren't harmless. Those are demons. And the spirits that you worship at night, and the spirits that come and speak with you at night, on this special night, those aren't your relatives. You're being tricked. You're being fooled by Satan, and those are actually ghosts and ghouls, and you should fear them. So you can see how Halloween started going down a darker path as Christianity tried to shove those beliefs out of their heads and make them, feel like, oh my gosh, we've been idiots this whole time, believing that these things were our relatives, and that that this was a good time of year to celebrate. The Celtic god of the dead world, they were told was actually Satan himself. So the place where they believed all their relatives went to was hell. And so they just tried to scare it out of them, scare the holiday out of them, which it didn't really work, because the Roman Empire didn't spread throughout all of Europe. Another thing associated with Halloween is, of course, witches, which this also plays into. Celtic believed that women and men were equal. There was no, men weren't the dominant enforcer. In fact, in many religions, the woman is the more spiritual of the two because of her ability to create life. And of course, the Christianity doesn't work that way. They have predominantly male, and not till just recently could women even hold a position in many Catholic situations. So the influence of Christianity was saying, hey, you need to be quiet and be pushed aside. And women that didn't want to do that were, of course, deemed witches. And it wasn't only that, it was the Celts did believe in magic and casting of spells. So that also didn't bode well with Christianity. So that all lumped into, hey, these are evil witches, and because they don't believe in what we believe in, and they're obviously doing magical evil spells, and they should, of course, be killed. And that spread throughout Europe, as we know, and also into the colonies with Salem in Massachusetts, and we all know what happened there. So the American holiday how Halloween even got over here after it's been, trying to been stomped out in Europe forever, was that Rome didn't make it as far as Ireland. It's believed that Halloween came over with the Irish, because Rome didn't get up there to snuff the paganistic beliefs in Ireland. So it came over with the Irish, and they had their harvest celebrations when they came to the United States. Much like if you've read Legend of Sleepy Hollow, or even seen the Disney adaptation of Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It was kind of a farm community situation. They all got together and had a celebration of the harvest in a barn, and had like a barn dance. And because of the Christian influence and the belief that spirits did walk that night, from the original Samhain belief, ghost stories, of course, were a common event there. So you come over to someone's house, have a few drinks, eat a lot of food, have a dance, and then to wind it all down, have a nice scary story to walk home to. So that was what kind of went on in the United States for a while, until it became more of a larger thing and marketed and became the marketing bite-sized candy franchise that it is today. But where trick-or-treating actually came from, during the original, way back back at the start in Samhain, and many celebrations of the Celtic people, the children would do what they called house begging, and they would go from door to door asking for snacks and treats and whatnot, and that, of course, came into the trick part of trick-or-treat, the treat part of trick-or-treat. The trick part came from when it got over to the United States. Early colonies, early towns and cities, they would segregate each other. The Germans would be in one section, the Irish would be in another section of town, and during this one night a year, it was common for the different ethnic groups to play tricks on each other, going door to door and doing harmless pranks to each other. So that's the trick part of trick-or-treat. And then, of course, we know it, unfortunately, this night that became a night of mischief escalated in some cases where militant groups would use it as an excuse to do horrific things, such as the Ku Klux Klan and whatnot. So that's unfortunate, but it also led to the mythos of Halloween itself, and what an evil, terrible night it is. Just the last note here, the jack-o'-lanterns. How did they come about? Well, back again to the Celts, they did in fact use fruits and vegetables as lanterns, especially turnips and things that were so kind of inedible at different points that they used them just to hold candles. And they didn't carve faces out of them, or they were just a lantern. They were just something that they carried around as lanterns. And an interesting thing I discovered was that pumpkins weren't available. They are an North American vegetable that originated here. So there is no way that the Celts or Druids or anyone over there had any pumpkins. So carving faces and pumpkins and putting them out, I had always heard that it was the thing that, well, they did this to drive off evil, and it was kind of a cool little idea, but it wasn't true at all, because they didn't believe in evil. So they wouldn't have anyone to drive off. They didn't believe in evil spirits or demons. So the whole carving jack-o'-lantern is a American made-up thing, which is just a twist on the lanterns that the Celts made. So that's just a little bit of history. It's not spooky. It's other than the horrific blood trail that was left by the Christians killing everyone that didn't believe in their religion. And I'm sorry if some people out there are Christian and find this offensive, but I'm not going to lie. I'm not a fan of Christianity, but these aren't things I made up. They're facts. Christianity or any religion, when it spreads, leaves a wake of badness often. So, and I don't think anyone can deny that. So, anyway, that's just a little bit of the history of Halloween. I'm going to continue on now to tell you some of the things that happened to me paranormally as I grew up in rural Iowa. To give you a little bit of an overview of where I grew up, I lived in central kind of eastern Iowa, and it was in a town that was no longer a town anymore. It was 100 people. The town used to be larger, but with it was a railroad town, and the railroad diverted another direction, left the town sitting there, and the town just kind of died out. People went ahead and moved to wherever the railroad moved to, or I assume businesses died and everything when the train left back in the 1800s. So anyway, what's left is just a few scattered houses out in the country and an abandoned train track, and people still fight over who owns the streets, because the streets are all overgrown with grass. So people say, well, this is part of my yard, and it's actually the city's, which doesn't exist. So it was a constant pain in all the neighbors' sides. But you could still go down to where the track ran along the river and see the bed of the railroad track and foundations of old houses that aren't there anymore, and buildings. Kind of a creepy vibe down there, because you can see where life used to happen, human life. And I had on occasion gotten stuck out there in the middle of the night without any light. I'll go ahead and tell you what happened. I was out fishing, and a storm was coming. I was out in the woods, so I'm out in the woods in this area and I had a campfire going, and it was nighttime, and I had planned to stay the night down there fishing. And some storms are coming. My father didn't want me down there, of course, when there was tornado warnings out, or watches out. So he came down, and I could hear the road, because there was a bridge that went over the river, and I heard a car pull up. But I was far enough out that I couldn't see. I could just hear him, because he had really loud exhaust. And he yelled out to me and told me what was going on, and that he wanted me to come home, and I yelled back that I would. And he didn't stay. He didn't stay and wait for me. I had a lot of gear to pick up, I guess, and he just didn't want to wait, but he drove off. So I picked up my stuff and put out the fire and left. When the fire was out, I was left in the dark. Pitch black in the dark, with nothing but the woods and blackness. And for I'd say about 3 minutes, I panicked and was running crazily through the woods the wrong direction and getting myself further away from the direction I wanted to go. And finally, tripping over logs and whatnot, I stopped and I decided I need to get a hold of myself. And I just froze and went, okay, what do I need to do? I know which way the river runs. I found the river and followed the current back. I saw which way the current was going, and I knew which way I needed to go. Followed the river back to the bridge and got out of there. But like I said, that was kind of a creepy place to be at night. That's not part of the paranormal stuff, but I just wanted to share that anyway. To tell you a little bit about the place I lived, in the 1800s, the building I lived in was the school, one-room school. And it had been added onto and then later became a church, and then became our house after it was a church. And then across the street from that was the city's dance hall. And it was a big, long building like you'd expect from the 1800s dance hall. And had a stage and everything. And that was my father's workshop. He built furniture and did wood carving, and he bought that building to make into a workshop. And he didn't do much renovation to it. He added an office and pretty much left it the way it was. It still had the stage and everything. He just set up his machinery in there to work, and that was it. But it was really interesting. In the summertime, we'd till our garden to get ready to plant the garden, and we'd kick up things that the children had lost while they were playing in the schoolyard in the 1800s. So find marbles, and I have a junior fire marshal ring that I'd found, and it was made of metal because they didn't have plastic back then. So pieces of porcelain dolls and things that got broke, and so it's kind of a neat little reminder of what the place used to be. But because of all this history, you get, the spirits that come with it. And my father, on many occasions, he would work late into the night, and we didn't have a furnace in either building. Both were wood heat. So if you can imagine being in that big, huge dance hall, he had a pedestal and a chair that he'd sit at and carve when he was doing carvings. Nothing but the empty sound of the building and crackling of the wood-burning fireplace. It was a stove, cast iron stove. But being there late at night, he said he would often be working and feel a tap on his shoulder. Turn around, nobody there. Go back to working. Tap, tap, tap on his shoulder again. And whatever spirit was doing that, thought that was pretty funny. Because they did it a lot. It never happened to me, though. He also said that he would hear people walking into the shop, and into what we called the shop, and he'd hear the door open and close, somebody walk in, and he'd come out and say hello, and nobody there. And so that was kind of odd. One thing in particular that happened there that I did witness, during Christmas he would make wooden bells to give out as gifts to customers and acquaintances. And he'd carve them he'd turn them on the lathe and then put a little wooden clapper inside that hung on a wire inside of it. And he'd spray these with varnish and hang them up on a wire to dry in his office. And he had, probably 50 to 100 hanging on this wire. One night when I was there talking to him, and I had my back to them, and he was talking to me, and all of a sudden he got this strange look on his face, kind of questioning and then concerned, and he said, "What in the hell is that?" And I turned around, and on that string of bells, one bell in the center, the clapper started moving, or was swinging. Not another bell on that whole wire was even moving. And this bell itself wasn't moving, just the clapper inside. And It'd swing back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it got more intense until it started banging against the side of the bell. And then it stopped. And we were a bit flabbergasted by that, because that's, physically impossible. We tried everything. We tried shaking the walls, bumping things, trying to reproduce what had happened. We could not move just a single clapper inside of a bell, either all or nothing. And it wasn't like a breeze from the furnace, because we didn't have one. There was no wind moving in there. So, definitely was a witness to something that night. I have also had, over at the house across the road, on one occasion, my father, when he would come home at night, would load the stove with wood for the night, so it would heat the house through the night. And it was very distinct. He'd walk over to the wood-burning stove, and open the cast iron door, throw in some wood, and shut the door. Very noisy process. Often woke me up at night. But one night I wanted to talk to them, and my mother and father were across the road working. And I wasn't supposed to be up. I was supposed to be asleep because I had school in the morning, but there was something gnawing in my head. I don't remember what it was, and it's not important. But I wanted to speak with them, so I thought, when they come home, I'm going to ask them the question I had. So I kind of sat up and waited a little bit, and then I heard the door open, and I heard someone walk in, and I heard the cast iron stove open, and I heard it shut. And I thought, well, they're here. So I went into the living room, and there's not a soul, not a light on. It was pitch black. There's nobody there. And I looked out the door, and we just had fallen snow, and there was no footstep, no tracks coming in to the house. So nobody came in the house, but I heard someone come in the house. Up the road from our place, there was a cemetery. There still is, the Irving Cemetery, and it is maintained by someone. I don't know who still mows the lawn there, but nobody gets buried there anymore. It's long forgotten, surrounded by fields, cornfields, and it's a long-lost cemetery. But my girlfriend and I, at the time, when I was in high school, liked to use the driveway to the cemetery as a place to park and do what teenagers do in cars that are parked, because, like I said, it was out in the middle of nowhere. So we didn't drive into it, and there was a drive-through gate that was locked. It had a big padlock on the cast iron gate, and it had the cemetery had a fence all the way around it, a big cast iron fence, just like you'd expect on a creepy old cemetery. But we had other things in our minds, so we weren't thinking about spooks. So as you pull up to the driveway, you see the cast iron gate, the big drive-through gate, and then next to it is a little walk-through gate that was never locked. It had a little squeeze lever that you'd squeeze and open it, and it would fit into a notch. In fact, the tombstone on the front page there, I have a picture of, is from that cemetery. But anyway, we pulled up one night. Everything, as I'm pulling up, the headlights of the car showed me that everything was shut. The walk-through gate was shut. The drive-through gate was shut. So we shut the car off and hopped into the back seat and started doing what you do in the back seat of a car when you're a teenager. And all of a sudden, it felt like someone had jumped onto the bumper of the car, because the car sunk down and popped back up. It was sunk down in the shocks and popped back up, and we both felt it, and we're like, "What the heck was that?" I sat up and looking around, and nobody's out there, but we saw a car coming on the horizon. You could see the headlights of a car approaching. So we weren't supposed to be there. So we scrambled and got into the front seat and started the car up. And I flipped on the headlights, and the walk-through gate was swinging open. So we got out of there in time that the car didn't see us. But it was almost as if someone was having fun watching us and then wanted to warn us that the car was coming. You know, it's like, hey guys, this is fun, but hey, you better look what's coming. So I suppose out there in the middle of nowhere in this cemetery, if spirits were lingering, we would be quite a welcome entertainment, I suppose. But anyway, no explanation for that happened. My brother had a few experiences in that area as well. He has always been quite a dog fan. He enjoys dogs and has a few. And one night he was driving down the country road in that area and saw what appeared to be a white German Shepherd, he said. And the ditches in most rural areas in Iowa are fairly deep. If you stand in them, they'll come up to your chest. You know, before you level with the road, you'll be about chest high. And he was watching this dog running along the road, and then it jumped into the ditch. And he thought, well, you know, it's a lost dog. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it belongs to somebody, or I better check it out. And so he pulled over, and this was also, like I said, out in the country in the middle of nowhere. He was just driving down a gravel road. He got out. He didn't have a flashlight, so he kind of aimed the truck at the direction the dog went into the ditch, because it was kind of dark down the ditch, and got out and kind of, you know, you don't want to run up to a strange dog, so he kind of walked over cautiously and got down into the ditch and looked down. And there was a driveway right there that went from the road into the field, and a drainage tube, or culvert we called them, that allowed water to drain. It was pretty big, about 3-4 feet wide in diameter, big enough for a person to crawl into. And there was no dog, but he saw this, and he assumed that the dog must have crawled into the hole. And so he knelt down, looked into the black that was down in that hole that went through there, and whistled for the dog. He knelt down and said, "Come here, boy," like that. He sat there, and not a sound. And he was just about to, you know, look around the other side, and he heard through the tube, right back at him, he heard, slow and deliberate like that. And he said it just made the hair on his back stand up, and a tingle, you know, shot through him. And he stood up and cautiously backed away, got into his truck and left. He said there's no way that was an echo, and there's no way a dog is whistling back at him. So he got the hell out of there. And I can't say I blame him. He also had an experience with his friend. His friend had rented a country house all alone out on a farm. And he went over there one night with his girlfriend at the time, and they were going to stay the night. And my friend had, and his friend had, he did karaoke, where he had a karaoke machine that he rented out to parties and things, and he would go and run the machine for people and to make some extra money. And he was off doing that, so he wasn't home, and we had no plans on being home till dawn, because this party, I guess, he was going to was going to be all night. So they just stayed downstairs on the couch, and He said at about 3 they started hearing footsteps on the ceiling, which was the second floor of the building, of the house. And I don't really understand this part, but he said they just sat there listening to this whatever stomp around on the ceiling. He said you could hear the pattern of the footsteps going around and around and around upstairs, and this happened till dawn. So from about 3 o'clock to 5, he claims they sat there and listened to these footsteps. Now, I told him, I said, did you go up and see what it was? Because I certainly would have. And he said, no, I was too scared. But they weren't scared enough to leave. So it seems like in that situation, it's fight or flight. You know, either you're going to go see what the heck is going on, or you're going to get the hell out of there. They did neither. They sat there. So this didn't deter him, though. He later moved in with him. And this is when something really extraordinary happened. He had a room upstairs, and his friend had a room down the hall. And he was asleep, stone cold asleep, middle of the night. Door to his room was shut, and all of a sudden, he said it was like someone kicked the door in. And it wasn't, like just a bang and the door opened up. He said it slammed open so hard that it smashed against the wall, punched the doorknob through the drywall, and then slammed shut. And he sat straight up in the bed and was like, what the hell just happened? And he flipped on the light and saw the big hole punched in the wall, opened the door and ran down the hallway. There was no light on. He flipped the light on for the hallway, went into his friend's room, and his friend was sound asleep. Turned the light on, and his friend's all groggy and saying, well, what's going on? He said, someone just ran into my room and kicked the door open. So they both got up and went looking through the house. The front door was still locked. Nobody had been in the house. Nobody left the house. But something was angry enough to kick the door to his room in. Evidently, he didn't like him living there. And he kind of took that hint and moved out. Not particularly because of that, but I'm sure that was a factor. So, those are just a few things that happened. There is that story on my front page about the Sleep Watcher, and that also I could do that, but I want to keep this file small. I've done a few tests with this, and I had to lower the quality of the audio. You can probably notice that. I'm sorry. But the file size was just getting about, for each meg, it was for each minute of the audio we do here, it was about a meg. So if I did an hour-long program, it would be 50, 60 megs for you to download to listen to it, and I don't think you want to do that. So it's a little bit lower quality, and I kind of want to tie things up so that it's not such a huge file. Before I leave, though, I want to give you some reminders. This forums are still pretty lonely. There's nobody there. I really would, I can see when people visit my site with the hit counter I have, but it'd sure be nice to talk to you guys if you wanted to share things that happened to you, or just want to comment on what I've been doing, or say something you'd like me to talk about. I'd sure be welcome to it. Unfortunately, the forums, like I said, they make you sign up, and it's of course free. It's not. I mentioned that you have to be a member, but it's not like it costs anything. It's a free sign up, but it's just a pain to have to remember your login and password, and that's not something I have any control over, unfortunately. But I would sure like to hear from you guys that are coming to the site. We've had hits from Kuwait and Canada and across the world and across the United States. And I know there's, people around the world interested in this stuff, and I'd sure like to talk to you. Also, the blog I have, don't forget about that. I tend to update that a little bit more often than the site itself. So if you come to the site a couple times and you don't notice any activity, check the blog, because maybe I've done something with that. And the next program is hopefully going to be my friend Arnie and Kevin, my coworkers that have some pretty great stories, and we're going to be doing that in the professional studio at work. So hopefully it'll sound really good and be really small of a file. So, and my friend Zach's going to be doing that, and I may be joined by a person interested in being a co-host for the program. So if he's interested or not, I'm not. He sounded interested. I don't know. It's much more interesting to have a conversation with someone. So rather than you guys listening to me just ramble on to myself. So we'll see if he wants to join us for that. And until then, I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you enjoy the website. Please post on the forums and have a great Halloween. Do something scary. Don't just follow the marketing traditions of running around and shoving your face full of candy. Do something spooky. It's what Halloween's all about. Well, American Halloween's all about. And if you're into the other religions, celebrate the harvest. There's something really, wholesome and good about celebrating the seasonal change. It just feels wholesome. So, all right. Have a good evening. 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 Have a good